We are coming up here on the half hour here on OpenLine. First of all, thank you for joining us tonight. We are talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the political ramifications of that. Dr. John Vile from MTSU is our guest tonight. Once again, Dr. Vile, thank you for being with us. We're going to get right back to the phones. We've had lots of calls tonight. I appreciate that. This is a discussion worth having. Reverend Fuzz is on the line. Good evening, Reverend.
Good evening, Dr. Vile. I want to go right to this. One of my more sincere and intense church members have asked me several times this week, Reverend, please pray for the people of Ukraine. I'm going to ask this, maybe you've done some of it already, thinking about Vladimir Putin. What do you think is in his mind? What is his end game? What is he thinking about? Why would he do this? And do you think that America's response, how would you have responded? Those are my questions.
Ooh, good questions. Reverend Fuzz, thank you for calling in. Good to hear your voice tonight. He touches on a phrase there. What is the end game for Vladimir Putin? So good. What do you think?
Well, let me start by commending him for praying. I know we at our church yesterday, we had the same thing. I have, maybe because I try to think geopolitically, I have been praying for rain in Ukraine for several weeks now, hoping that it would mire down the tanks and that it would stop the invasion. But prayer is important. And, you know, we pray not only for the Ukrainian people, I feel sort of sorry for the Russian soldiers. I think many of them probably, you know, if they even know they're in the country, I'm not sure that all of them did initially, but I think many of them probably came and thought they would be considered liberators, you know, that they're hearing that the Ukrainians, you know, are under this oppression and whatever. And, you know, they're mothers' sons as well and daughters, and, you know, certainly pray for them. I think, you know, I don't know what Putin's end game is. One theory is that, you know, he made a comment at the time of the fall of the Iron Curtain that this was the most momentous, saddest event that happened in world history in the 20th century. And some people think that he's trying to restore, you know, country by country, the former Roman Empire, the former Soviet Empire. It may be more, you know, another explanation is it's closer to earlier Russian imperialism. You know, you have and you know, America in some degree was responsible. You know, we take a chunk of Mexico, we push a little farther north toward Canada, push toward the West. He's certainly not the first nation or the first leader in history who, you know, probably thinks that he's, you know, if he can go down as history as a person who has reunited Mother Russia with, you know, some of their wayward children, probably to him that would be a great thing. But you know, one of the concerns about Putin right now is that he seems very isolated. One of my friends just sent me a picture of a table with Putin at one end, and about 30 feet away, you see all his counselors down there grouped together. And you just wonder, you know, and I worried about this with Trump. You know, he seemed to only surround himself with people who were ideologically aligned with him, and you just wondered if anybody ever said, let's stop and think about this, or are you sure you want to do that, or, you know, maybe we're getting into something that we shouldn't. So that I think is, you know, we may never know, but that's a concern.
Melanie has been on the line for quite a while. Melanie, thank you for your patience tonight. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, for quite some time, I've felt that Trump was a Russian sympathizer, and in the way that Russia was also hacking our system, trying to keep Trump in office. And then with Russia attacking Ukraine, they know that we're going to help them financially, even if we don't put troops in there. And then with all of the money that we send out to our people when we were hit with COVID, and then we also had so many refugees that came across the borders that, of course, we helped. And I'd heard that a lot of people felt like that was orchestrated by someone, that it was an organized system going on there. So I wonder now if possibly we don't have Trump still communicating with Russia. And if that's not something that we maybe need to keep an eye on, and Trump continuously keeps trying to divide the country and weaken our democracy, and this may be a time that Putin thinks it's good to use Ukraine to actually get to us. Do you think there's any possibility of any of that? Thank you for listening.
Melanie, thank you for calling in. Dr. Vile?
I don't think so. But, sometimes things have unintended consequences. I mean, she mentioned the migration. Most of the migration that we experienced was from South America. It had very little to do with Russia or China or anything. It was probably more push factors from, the deteriorating economies and autocracies there than it was any pull factor from the United States. But she makes an interesting point. Some people believe that the French Revolution largely came about as a result of France helping us in the American Revolution and accumulating great debts in order to do so. And at the time, it seemed, a good strategy. This was their way of getting back at England. But ultimately, they ended up hurting themselves. And so there's always a danger that, and maybe we saw this in Vietnam, that we were so anxious to push back against communism and paint it wherever it was that sometimes we pick our fights very well. When it comes to Ukraine, again, I think we were wise not to send in troops, but it is so near our allies in NATO that I think we cannot really stand by helplessly and not do anything.
In fact, we have members of the 101st over there standing there on the border.
Yes.
Do you think that there is a time here soon where our troops actually must go in?
No, I don't. And if they were members of NATO, we would be obligated by treaty to do so. But we're not. And at this point, I mean, we don't want to play Putin. How long has Putin told us now that he wasn't going to invade? These were just training exercises.
Right.
They were not going to cross the border. Well, we've taken a similar line that we're not going to cross, we're not going to give troop aid to Ukraine. And I don't think we want to be in the position of Putin and going back on that. But I think up to that, we ought to give them as much as we can, humanitarian and military aid.
All right, Tom is also on the line. Tom, thanks for being part of OpenLine tonight. Go ahead.
Good evening. Glad to talk to you. First of all, I'd like to say thank goodness for Phil Williams. The twice impeached one-term orange one, you know who I'm talking about, continues to spread the big lies, the biggest fan Putin will ever have. Now, I would like to read something here real quick. One of our senators said this about Biden's Supreme Court nomination. President Biden's announcement just days after an unprovoked full-scale invasion by Russia is extremely inappropriate. Once again, Biden is putting demands on sorry, I'm old.
That's okay. Go ahead. Take your time.
Biden is putting demands on the radical progressive. Oh, man, it just, I had a picture of it on my camera and it just disappeared.
I think we understand the direction this was going.
Yeah, well, it was Marsha Blackburn. This is a woman that said years ago that Planned Parenthood sold baby parts and she put a stop to it. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Excuse me. Dr. Vile, I'll let you have the floor. Do you think it was poor timing?
I had a response, and now I've sort of lost it.
No,
here. So
I kind of did too. That's why I put you on the spot. But do you think it was poor timing on President Biden's part to announce his nomination with all of this going on?
Jackson is a liberal judge who believes strongly in the U.S. Constitution, has a great personal story, seems devoted to the United States. I think the three nominees that Trump made, you could say pretty much the same thing about them, only they lean toward the conservative side. I think it's good to have a mixture of both on the court. I think that they ought, like us, They ought to be listening to both sides. I believe that she will try to enforce the Constitution impartially, and I think that's really all you can ask. You can't expect a Democratic president to be nominating a conservative justice, and you can't expect most Republicans to be nominating a liberal justice.
I'm going to take a little bit of a turn here from our topic tonight, but I want to expand upon this idea. There's been so much talk lately with President Trump's nominations, with President Biden's nomination now, just how politically divided they are,
Yes.
or politically inspired, maybe I should say. And there's been talk of expanding the Supreme Court to maybe dilute that factor a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
I hope we don't. You know, the last time this happened, or the attempt was made, was in 1937, and it was an attempt by Franklin Roosevelt to take on a whole term without making any appointments. The court was routinely striking down New Deal legislation. It was debated extensively. Initially, it was thought that it was going to pass. And we've gone with 9 justices for well over 100 years, just after the Civil War. It's ideological enough. There's no reason to believe that if we appointed other people that they wouldn't just be ideologues on the other side. I think we ought to leave it.
You know, every time the president of late makes an appointment, everybody throws their hands up and say, well, of course he did that person. You know, this is the way we are now. But do we look back over history and say it's kind of the way it's always been?
It's become, partly because of the open hearings, it's become more divisive, and particularly since the Bork nomination, both sides have sort of pulled out all the stops. And frankly, they both tend to make outrageous statements about the others that are, caricatures of the people that are being appointed. I just don't think Republicans have much to complain about. They got 3 appointments. They delayed an appointment from Obama that he should have gotten. They had 3 appointments during Trump, and Biden finally gets one. He didn't choose the most radical person he could. He chose somebody with a great story. First African-American woman ever to be nominated. I think it's a great thing.
All right, it's time for us to take another quick break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about President Zelensky. And of course, we can take your questions and calls too when it comes to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Phone lines are open, 615-737+. Take advantage of it. This is our last segment, so stay with us.